This is All Things Fitness and Wellness, uniting industry thought leaders and fitfluencers on the mission to inspire innovation and encourage people to live a life fit and well. Brought to you by Fitness World, your fitness, your way. Visit fitnessworld.ca. According to Obesity Canada, 1 in 10 premature deaths among Canadian adults aged 20 to 64 is directly attributable to obesity. Obesity is a leading cause of type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, arthritis, and stroke, just to name a few. There's also an economic toll. The disease costs the global economy an estimated $2 trillion a year, and yet not enough is done on the fronts of prevention and treatment. That's why we have today's guest, Kristal Hartman, who sits on the board of directors for the Obesity Action Coalition. In this episode, Kristal opens up about her personal journey with obesity. She shares the implications of weight bias and stigma, and explains that physical activity is an important facet of the obesity treatment and prevention toolkit. Kristal provides valuable insight for health club operators to understand how they can best create spaces that are approachable and support those living with this chronic disease. Before we get to it, be sure to hit like and subscribe. We have new podcast episodes weekly that feature industry leaders and influencers. Plus, we continue our gym and wellness haven tours that feature founder stories from some of the most inspiring names in the business. This is ATFW.
To start things off, first of all, tell me about what the Obesity Action Coalition is.
It is a patient-led organization where we have over 70,000 members in the United States. And we really kind of focus on three main areas, which is education and support and advocacy. So we focus on education for our members. When it comes to advocacy, we believe that every person deserves the right to compassionate, non-biased healthcare and access to treatments for the chronic disease of obesity. As we know, there's several FDA treatments now available, and so we advocate for the availability of those treatments, as well as treatment to bariatric surgery, mental health care treatment, etc. And then just support. It's been the best support community that I could ever have dreamed for. Just being with like-minded folks, people who are going through similar journeys to my own. It's just a huge support network that a lot of people don't have necessarily built around them personally, whether, they don't have a supportive family or friend base or whatnot. And maybe sometimes they do, but still it's nice to have the support network of all of the other folks for Obesity Action Coalition.
Well, and as you share that story, you've referenced a couple of times your own personal journey. So give me a little bit of insight into what that did entail.
Yeah, so I actually experienced obesity from the time I was in my teens. I was on a birth control method that really caused a huge increase in gaining in weight. And from that moment, as I, developed as a young adult and young woman and all the way through my 20s and early 30s, I was the kid that in high school that needed the, bigger size of dance costume. I went to college, and instead of gaining the freshman 15, right, I gained the freshman 50. Then I found out in my early 20s that I had thyroid issues and that I had PCOS, which was fairly new, and I had not heard the diagnosis of polycystic ovarian syndrome yet, and found out that I would likely have difficulties getting pregnant and staying pregnant, and that ended up being true. Went through, a few miscarriages, ended up having a successful pregnancy, then another miscarriage. Then needed some it was drug treatment for getting pregnant, and it was basically taking oral hormone pills. Then got pregnant with twins, had a twin pregnancy. Even though I tried to keep the weight gain to a minimum, it was still, I still gained quite a bit of weight with twins. Took them full term; they were almost 7 pounds apiece. And so I found myself in my early 30s, and throughout all of this journey, I had just continued to gain weight and had a really hard time losing any weight, and especially once I lost weight, maintaining weight loss. And so I found myself in my early 30s on 14 medications for the comorbidities of obesity. I was pre-diabetic and I had major lung issues and breathing issues and asthma. Basically, I was sick all the time, and I had a primary care physician where I was only hearing, if you could just eat a little less and walk a little bit more, you'd be able to manage your weight. And it was really difficult. And I had tried all the different fad diets and all these different types of things. And I even tried one of the very first available medications, FDA approved medications on the market, and I had a bad side effect. So it was actually my endocrinologist who was like, Kristal, I think we've tried everything. It's time for bariatric surgery. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, I'm only in my early 30s. I thought bariatric surgery was for people who were, older and like really like had all these years that they had tried. And it was, they had not been able to lose weight. And here I am in my 30s. And I think bariatric surgery patients are in their 50s or 60s, right? And I just had this total view that I should have been able to control this myself. I was successful in all these other areas in life. And, that was echoed, unfortunately, by my primary care physician, who, when I told her that, my endocrinologist had recommended bariatric surgery, she said, that's ridiculous. I have 400 and 500 pound patients that I can't even talk into bariatric surgery. She's like, you're young, you're educated, you're in the medical field. At that point in time, I was a drug rep, and I was out talking about, diabetes and heart disease and obesity every single day. She said, you should be able to do this on your own. This is absolutely, you just got to put that fork down and you just need to start walking more. And so I waited a whole year before I had bariatric surgery because I felt so shamed, internally shamed and externally by my doctor shamed and experienced the weight bias, that I ended up gaining more weight, getting sicker, was hospitalized 2 times with pneumonia. My, lungs and my breathing were getting worse and worse. I was on so many medications. I finally called the bariatric surgery center and I was just like crying because I felt like that meant I was a failure. But I quickly learned that that's not the case. It's just another tool in the toolbox that I needed to manage my weight. It took me a little over a year to lose 100 pounds, and I've lost and maintained that since 2000. Well, my bariatric surgery was 2014, so 2015 till now, I've been able to maintain 100-pound weight loss. I still need all of the tools in the toolbox. I have chronic obesity care. I have regular mental health care. I'm still on one of the FDA approved medications because without that, my weight still shoots back up outside of my BMI range, and I need that. So I have OAC, and so I have all of these different support mechanisms to help my, to continue to help my journey because it's a chronic disease. I still consider myself a patient living with obesity, even though the scale doesn't say that right this moment. I still live with obesity every single day. I still have to manage it every single day, and I will for the rest of my life. So
first of all, I just want to commend you for, I know it's never easy to just have our stories out there. So I think that it's really incredible when there's people like yourself that are willing to just be vulnerable and stand up. So thank you for that.
Yes, absolutely.
And I'm glad that you touched on as well having the mental health care on the other side of that journey, because I imagine it must be, anytime we're kind of going through a physical change, and then never mind that, I'm sure, it's a surgery still, which can be quite overwhelming. You're trying to manage your family at the same time. So what has the mental journey been through this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's so, so important. And, even the Obesity Action Coalition now has created a mental health care committee so that we can be even more dedicated to supporting the mental health journey of our members and those living in larger bodies. We even have not nearly enough of them, but we even have now psychologists and mental health care providers that are focusing on those patients who are living in larger bodies and who need chronic weight management. When we say chronic weight management, we mean literally from head to toe. So it means, mental health, it means physical health, it means social support. So all of those things. And for me, I always say they cut out 3/4 of my stomach. I had the gastric sleeve surgery. So they cut out 3/4 of my stomach, but they didn't do anything to my brain, right? All of those things that are still contributing to, at least to my personal journey, and most everyone's, there's something mental, maybe it's trauma, right, that has been experienced. Maybe it's food addiction, right, that has been, or having, food issues, right, from usually a young age, whether it's binging or purging. And so there's all of these different types of addictions and things that could be part of that. And part of what I had to learn is that I had to keep myself in a good, healthy headspace, or else, I would spin and turn to food, which was one of my coping mechanisms, right? And so having regular mental health care has been incredibly been a huge part of my journey and has helped me, and still to this day. So.
Well, and it's great to know that there are more coming on board, because I really
Yes.
can imagine that's a vital part of the process. Now, when we speak to obesity, are you able to share some of the stats? I know obviously you're joining us from the States, but we parallel in a lot of ways here in Canada.
Yes.
So
True.
talk to me a little bit about what we're seeing currently.
Yeah. So, even though there's been a little bit more focus, on treating obesity than there has been in the past, we still are looking at an epidemic. And when people talk about, oh, well, we need to treat all of these comorbidities of obesity, we still are a long way off from having obesity recognized as a disease, recognized as, if a patient wants to have help and have help managing this disease, that they should have access to care. Obesity Canada and the OAC and, Canada and United States in general, we continue to see an increase in obesity. We see it in our childhood population. We're really starting to dig in there and seeing what we need to support families and adolescents, that are living in larger bodies. And ultimately, it comes down to the fact that it's still one of the last socially acceptable ways to make fun of people, right? It's not okay to make fun of people for their gender or sex or sexual orientation or age or any of that, but we still see rampant bias and stigma in the world, whether it's our own small communities, maybe it's our families and our friends, or whether it's the medical community, or whether it's the greater whole of society. People are still absolutely made fun of for living in larger bodies. And we're really trying to call out that weight stigma and weight bias, so that as people living with a chronic disease, we no longer have to absolutely live with, this is our fault, we did this to ourselves, therefore we have to fix it ourselves. In the grand scheme of things, we know that we need chronic health care just like everyone else who's dealing with any other chronic health issues.
Well, and I'm sure even if you look at it from the financial perspective, if that was part of the care continuum, as we know, comorbidities are part of something that the obese population is more susceptible to. So I imagine it would be a trickle down cost savings if you address it at the root. And then on top of that, helping people avoid having to navigate some really scary health issues that are coming down the line. You did mention there, and I know that the childhood obesity rates have been rising rampantly. And I think when we speak to the stigma, that's probably where there sometimes can be a little bit of a divide, because through your journey, obviously you mentioned there were a lot of components that were happening there that led to that journey. Simultaneously, we know when we're looking at these rates rise, I mean, I know within our education system, for example, courses on proper nutrition and courses on our physical education has slowly been fizzled away. So is there an influence as well as part of that component? Because I feel as though a lot of that has been, like, some of our tools from the grassroots keep getting taken away from us.
Fitness World's 16 British Columbia high-value, low-cost gyms are committed to helping people reach their fitness goals, whatever those may be. Exercise and movement play a pivotal role in supporting people's overall health and wellness, and it is Fitness World's mission to provide the facilities, services, and amenities to help you achieve your fitness your way. Visit fitnessworld.ca for more information.
Managing obesity in an adolescent is challenging because it's not just adolescent, right? It's the whole family. and it's a family unit. And so that there's a combination of treating the actual patient, right, but also the whole family unit. And we also want to fully recognize that kids are growing and they're changing and they're developing, and so it's a really tough kind of line, right, to understand how we can best treat obesity in the pediatric or adolescent population, while still understanding that they still have a unique situation, right? Still a lot of growth and development to do. And I think, we do need more programs that, focus on nutrition and exercise. We also need medical care, though, because we're understanding that obesity is a very complicated disease. It's multifactorial. We're understanding that there's some genetics involved, and we're understanding that there's hormones that our body makes or doesn't make properly that are involved. And there's all of these sort of physiological things that are happening besides just, how we're moving our bodies in everyday life and what we're putting in our mouths in everyday life. There's physiological effects that are happening too, and they're happening younger. And by helping to treat, obesity at a younger age, we're hoping to, bend the trend so that by the time they're getting into adult years, they're not struggling or challenged like many of us who are in our adult years and still living with the disease of obesity every day.
Well, and I imagine too, if that conversation isn't handled well, I mean, anyone that remembers going through adolescence, you take a lot of things to heart in a very big way. And depending on what's said, I imagine it could stick with you and just cause further issues down the line.
Right. That's absolutely right. And so you really, really, I mean, we all deserve compassionate, non-biased care, but in that population in particular, right? And so we have many pediatricians that are starting to really put together an idea of how to best, treat obesity in the younger population. And it's incredible because the group of folks that we're working with at OAC know that it's incredibly important to provide that compassionate care at that age. We don't, we're not trying to make long-term negative effects here. We're trying to make long-term positive effects. And so, it's a delicate balance.
Well, and I know that OAC provides a lot of tools even for parents if they're looking to navigate conversations and resources there. Now, when we talk about adolescent population, in many factors, representation is a huge component as well. Like even as adults, you want to be able to see yourself in certain spaces. And at All Things Fitness and Wellness, obviously, we're quite focused on gym populations and boutique gym spaces and things like that. So kind of switching a little bit of gears here, but talk to me a little bit about what is seen when we talk about advertisements of what means a fit and healthy lifestyle and what impact that currently has.
Yeah, I think what I've seen is an improvement showing all body sizes and all body types can fit into really cute, fun, exciting active wear, can be, active in moving their bodies. And I do see that we are bending the trend in how we're represented in the media overall. It used to be you'd open your whatever Glamour magazine, whatever it might be, and you never ever saw a body type like your own, right? For me, right, in my adolescent, it was always, only thin people get to wear these clothes. Only thin people are shown, working out and moving their bodies and being active, right? And so we have a long ways to go because we still sort of as a society still really value thinness and, a certain body type. But ultimately, there's a lot of brands that have really stepped up and shown that being inclusive and showing all body types is really, really important. And I love that.
Well, and continuing on that note, for example, here in Canada, it's like 84% of the population isn't getting their minimum amounts of physical activity every week, and that's 150 minutes. So what would you say for getting people to go from, and again, it's recognizing that obesity isn't necessarily a lack of fitness or nutrition, but I think definitely that can be a component in a lot of cases as well, especially when we look at these statistics. There is a correlation there. So how can gym spaces make themselves more approachable or a place that works for everybody?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, ultimately representation. So, a gym space might need a private area where people who are just not feeling like they can really work out with, all of the super fit, really focused fitness people. And it's like, oh my gosh, like I feel like maybe I can walk on a treadmill for 20 minutes today. And that's like what the first part of my workout today. Right. So I think having some, private spaces where people might be able to have be away from the the main gym crowd and not feel like, oh my gosh, I have to compare myself to someone who's over here lifting you know all of these heavy weights and things like that. I also think having representation in your staff would be incredibly important. So staff members of all shapes and sizes and colors and everything like that, just so that if someone comes in and they might be able to see someone else like, oh man, like that person's beautiful and really fit and has a similar body type to mine, like they may understand some of my limitations. People with living in larger body sizes oftentimes might have problems with joints or knees or things like that that they're trying to work through. There is personal responsibility in every disease state, including obesity, and for overall health, not just for treating obesity. It is important for people to get physical activity, and I think it's also important to meet them where they're at. The expectation might be 150 minutes, but how do you help them build to that, right? Meeting them where they're at.
That is a really important element to highlight, and especially that differential, that exactly that moving our bodies, no matter what that body is,
That's right.
It's essential for our functionality, our health span, our lifespan. It also,
health.
I was just going to say, yeah, you took the words
too.
out of my mouth. It's exactly a wonderful space to work on our mental health. And I will say, when it comes to gym spaces, as someone that spends and has, it's done a lot for me personally.
Yeah.
My message to anyone that's listening as well that maybe doesn't feel comfortable is, truthfully, and I get in any situation, there's always a couple outliers, but for the most part, it's like everyone started somewhere, and there is this silent encouragement. I think I know for myself personally, if I see a new face in that gym space, you're like, oh, good for you. And then when all of a sudden you're like, oh, you're a regular now, like that's awesome. You're silently cheering each other on for all the wins. And I get that there's humans out there that maybe don't have that same supportive mindset, but for the most part, I think that is what you encounter. Obviously, breaking down the stigma is the big mission here for a large part. So what is the hope for the future when you look at the missions of the OAC?
Yeah, the hope for the future is ultimately that people living in larger body sizes, right? People living with the disease of obesity every day can get access to compassionate, understanding, non-biased care, that we reduce weight bias and weight stigma in society in general, that they have access to the types of treatments that they need. Sometimes that means meeting with exercise and movement scientists, right, that can help analyze how the body can move, meeting the person where they're at, right? Sometimes it's nutritionists, sometimes it's help grocery shopping, right? And understanding how to pick healthy foods. It's mental health care, it's access to the FDA approved medications. Instead of having to pay $1,600 a month for them, having them covered by insurance, just like medications for other chronic disease states, right? And so those are really the missions of the OAC, is that we really open the eyes of society to the fact that this is a chronic disease, that people do deserve care if they want care. And that once they seek out care, that it's the same access to that care as every other person dealing with any other disease state.
When you're kind of touching on it, obviously Ozempic has been everywhere, all over TikTok and social media. I know it's caused a little bit of controversy here in Canada as well, because initially obviously was geared for people with predisposition to type 2 diabetes.
Yes.
Right now, currently people have access for that purpose. They do not for weight loss. So what are the thoughts on, because there is a mass divide that's occurring right now?
Yeah, there is. And it's been in the media a lot. And we've been tracking, and managing that as best we can from the Obesity Action Coalition as well. And so ultimately, we don't feel like disease states should have to fight over who deserves medication more than the other. We absolutely support and understand the use of these medications in type 2 diabetes. We also appreciate that the pharmaceutical companies that are coming out with these medications are also studying them in a population of those with the disease of obesity, that they are bringing them out in doses that treat obesity, which is generally a different dose than treats type 2 diabetes, and there's physiological reasons for that, right? Treating blood sugar is different than treating weight. And that, there should be access to anyone who needs a treatment this way once they've talked to their doctor and have agreed upon the fact that this is the right treatment for them. It shouldn't matter which disease they have, which diagnosis they have. Some people will have both diagnoses, actually, type 2 diabetes and obesity, and that we should have equal access to those medications. And it's just like any other medication, you don't just get to take it and go off of it. It's a lifelong treatment. If you have high blood pressure, what happens if you go off of your high blood pressure medications? Your blood pressure goes back up. If you go off of it as diabetes, your blood sugar goes back up. If you are on medications for your cholesterol and you stop them, what happens? Your cholesterol goes back up. So it's the same with obesity, long-term, chronic treatment, and we should have access to the medications. And there shouldn't be this big fight over who deserves them more. And
I think the problem must be that it's not necessarily recognized as a disease on the one side of it, is what it sounds like.
Yep. Yeah. And people, and then, there's also a lot of talk out there about just using it for vanity purposes. Someone who is not actually diagnosed with obesity, utilizing medications to lose 5 to 10 pounds, maybe 20 pounds. And certainly, we aren't here to say who should and should not be. That should be a conversation with your healthcare provider, and they're making those determinations on who needs the medications. But you're right, they've been in the news a lot lately, so it's been interesting.
Well, and you speak to it well, that no one's going to be the gatekeeper of what is or what isn't, but it's also acknowledging, like anything out there, medication abuse is something that can happen. So people should be navigating the proper channels to see if it is the right thing for them. When you talk about, obviously, there are quite a few medical interventions and options that can be had to help people move through this chronic illness. But as you spoke to, even through your journey, it's something that it's still part of your life.
Yeah.
So talk to me about the maintenance on the other side of some of these interventions.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think our bodies, I believe in the science that talks a little bit about set point, which means your body gets to a certain weight and it becomes the set point. And what ends up happening is that your body constantly fights to get back to that. And that's how, for me, I would lose a little weight and then I would gain it all back. And usually each time I gained back, I would gain a little more even, I'd be a little higher than I was in my weight before I lost the weight. And so, the body is an amazing and crazy thing. It understands how to, how to sometimes work with us and how to work against us. And certainly, that's the thing about, bariatric surgery and some of these medications that are actually, physically and physiologically changing some of these issues with set points and hormones, stomach size, all of these different types of, treatments. And so I think ultimately the other side of that is that there is no just one and done. you don't just get to have surgery and be like, I'm done being like have obesity. I don't have to worry about my weight ever again. It has been challenging because there are points in time where my body just needs a change and says, well, you've hit this weight. I don't know. I don't like it anymore. I'm going to, increase your weight. And I feel like sometimes the maintenance is the hardest part. And so you have to kind of just keep throwing different things at your obesity to try to keep the body, working toward the end goal, which is, keeping a healthy weight. So it's been a challenge for me. I've needed all the tools in the toolbox, I've needed exercise. I've needed diet. And by diet, I don't mean diets.
Yes.
I mean like healthy nutrition foods. I need the mental health care. I need I had surgery. I need the medication after surgery. So, I mean, that's what we really talk about, is that it's not just about losing the weight, but it's about how do we support people along the entire journey, which also includes all the ups and downs of maintaining weight loss.
Well, and I really appreciate that you refer to it as a toolbox, because
Yes.
I think it's important. And maybe this is where some of the stigma can break down, because I know, and I'm sure, because there's 9 million bullies on the internet, that a very easy comment for people to make is, well, why don't you just go to the gym?
Mm-hmm.
And it's really important for people to understand that this is a complex disease, and there are many and multiple factors that bring to it, where exercise and nutrition on the other side of any of these interventions or through somebody's standard journey is just a component of the toolkit. And I really appreciate that you highlight how important it is for these places to really just make themselves feel safer and accessible for people to make that no fit to low fit or low fit to the next step, and just doing those baby steps from there.
When we look at weight bias and weight stigma, our internal biases also have to be addressed. We have our own feelings about our own selves, and sometimes that's what's holding us back too. We might say, oh, I don't even care if someone looks at me weird at the gym, but I feel like, oh my gosh, how can I go and I can only do ABC, and all these other people are doing XYZ, and and so it's just, there's also sort of that internal battle that we're always fighting to, along with that external, what are people going to think of us, because we've all experienced bullying, and weight stigma and bias at some point in time in our lives.
Well, I personally very much appreciate that you are someone that's like, this is my story. And I really appreciate you using your voice to educate on the fact that this is a disease, and that the fact that there are options out there and conversations that can be had. And obviously the biggest route is that you are doing this advocacy to create a sense of community so everyone can work together toward the same goal, because at the end of the day, nobody wants to live a life where they're more susceptible to chronic disease or not feeling well. I think everyone should have the opportunity to feel well. And we know that there are lots of interventions that can work in tandem with each other to help people on that journey. I like to leave everyone every time, and I know it puts you on the spot, but a little quote or mantra, if there's one that maybe you live by that can provide a motivational nugget for us, or a pleasant note to leave us on.
Most importantly, it's that, each day is a new day. And I feel like you might not have had the perfect day, right? Maybe you didn't get your exercise in. Maybe, you were cranky with a coworker. I mean, I don't know. There's all these things, right? If this hasn't been your most perfect day, it's okay. You get a new day tomorrow. And I feel like, as someone who has had a lifelong struggle with obesity, that internalized blame and shame and guilt tripping that I am so perfect at doing to myself, I can tell myself, maybe today wasn't exactly what I wanted it, but tomorrow is a brand new day.
You've just listened to All Things Fitness and Wellness. This episode was brought to you by Fitness World. Your fitness, your way. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you never miss out on hearing from industry thought leaders and influencers. We are on a mission to help everyone live a life fit and well.